So I'm thinking about this ball game that was played in, I think, by the Mayans, where they would knock this ball through this weird sideways hoop. That I don't think this is anything like basketball, because when you played this game, the winners were sacrificed to the fertility gods or something like that. Are you familiar with this, Lucas?
Oh, very familiar, and I don't know that the narrative of the winners being sacrificed. Actually,
Was it
maybe
the losers?
well,
I'm
it's
pretty sure it was the winners, because if you win this game, then they believed that there was some sort of a reincarnation, or like you would get an award. So like winning the game, then you got sacrificed, and there was a reward in the afterlife or something like that. So
Oh
there
man,
it was all set up in the game that, yeah, you if you win, you die.
there's a South Park about this with a little league. They'd like do their worst to let the other team win. I'm pretty sure. Well, I
okay.
don't know.
Wait a
I don't know.
second. Here's you guys. You guys might be right about the sacrifices that are associated with it, but what if I told you that there were no winners nor losers?
Okay, how's that
So,
work then?
Okay,
well,
well, you're blowing my mind. There was no winners and losers, because I'm somewhat familiar with this game, because I've actually walked around on one of these courts. One time when I was traveling, I think when I was in Belize, we actually had a chance to go swing by one of these places, because it wasn't that far away. So we did a quick travel up there, and the entire courtyard was all intact, and so we had a chance to hear the local guides describe it to us and whatnot. If I memory serves, it was in Belize.
Well, so let's think about what's going on here with the games, and also bear in mind, we play soccer or football and American football and basketball and volleyball and baseball,
Sports ball.
all the Calvin ball and dodge, all of these games that we play today, they all go back to this, and this is this game that we're seeing, which this is a beautiful. It's resurging and reemerging. Not that it ever left, as we all are obsessed with sports today, but where does it come from? And I think it's very important to think about, like, what is truly going on here is not about defeating the other side. When we talk about sports today, we always talk about who the
Well, I'm reminded of your discussions about volleyball, right? Where it's not us versus them, it's like us versus the ground. So is that what you're saying, that there's no winners and losers, because it's just the people versus the ball and gravity? Is that the
absolutely,
setup?
this is a recreation of gravity, and you also think about our obsession with AI today. Damn, you're hot. The If you think about our obsession with AI, and not just AI, but like gaming, period. We're it's one thing to think about, like, first person shooter game as, oh, I'm practicing to kill somebody, but that's not what's going on. Like, anyone who's building any of those games knows that it's all about the experience, the like raising your level of awareness in your world, and raising your ability to move in the world, understanding uh, that our minds and our brains need to learn how to use the spaceship that is our body, and to move around a world that's not necessarily familiar with us. So I was a volleyball coach for a long time, and whenever I coach volleyball, I start with explaining to my teams that volleyball is not about defeating another team. Volleyball is a metaphor for hunting, and if you're going to go out and hunt, and you're not going to use a gun or some other tool, the place where hunting starts is by getting a group of people together. And so when you kill a volleyball, you're not killing the other team, you're killing the volleyball. The volleyball is a metaphor for a bird that's flying out of a bush. And the reward that you get whenever that happens is not because you're happy about the lack of skill from your teammates or your opponents, but because in your mind, like, understands that this is a metaphor for hunting, and it thinks about eating. And like, I when a volleyball player or anyone who engages in sports, plays sports, walks away from those sports, they don't think about the game. They don't remember the game that they won, 25-1 or 7-0. They think about the recreations of gravity and reality that went on the longest. And so when we think about sports today as in this sort of notion of like even think of our narratives of timeouts and game over. That's just a discussion about time, and that is I mean even looked at how we manipulate the rules of games so we can cut it up and sell ads between it. But the reason that people go watch football on Monday night isn't because they're there for the ads. They're there for they're there to eat. They're there for the feast. And great sports players also understand that it's not about defeating their opponents, and it's not just about making a great meal for themselves. It's also about those people who are watching the game too. And so if you think about that, and then you think about notions of sacrifice that are associated with the game in Mayan and Aztec. I hate to use the word Aztec, but if in the I should say the Popol Vuh. But when you think about that, it kind of changes the narrative of both what a sacrifice means and what it means to win or lose.
So in this game, I don't know. I guess we could scroll through this the other post where they're talking about this. I don't know if they talk about whether you died or not. I don't actually think it says in here.
Well, I think it's maybe more so we should understand that the game and like the stone ball courts that you see in Mayan ruins, Chichen Itza, etc., are more like ceremonial churches, and the game is synonymous with the creation myth of the Maya. Are you familiar at all with the creation myth of the Maya?
I mean, well, just in the amount that when I was down there, I heard a whole bunch of this stuff. It didn't stick with me super well. So yeah, I'd love to hear about it.
Okay, so there is a. Well, I'll just get into it. The Valley of Mexico is also called the Valley of the Moon, and the Mayans and the Aztecs had this notion of the twin hero gods, and the twin hero gods were the sun and the moon. The moon was Hunahpu, and the sun was Chibalenque, and they go to the underworld and play a game against the gods of the underworld with the head of their father. And when they win that game, they create the world that we live in today. And when you look at the Big Dipper, the Big Dipper is the god that they throw out of the sky. Even when I said I don't like to use the word Aztec, and that's because they never said of themselves that they were Aztec. But whenever Cortez and the conquistadors arrived into Mexico, which we call Mexico today after the Mexica people, and chi is a word that you'll hear over and over. The Maya called themselves Chichi Maya, and the Inca called themselves the Quechí, and you get that word a lot. That means grandmother. The twin brothers were raised by their grandmother.
Well, and chi is something that we see in Chinese as well, right? Not just in the first character, but like
the
chi
life force,
the life
energy.
force. Yeah.
Well, and there's the Kiowa are the Kiowa and the Tanoan and the Tiwa tribes that live along the Rio Grande in New Mexico speak the oldest language of the Native American peoples, and of those we have a couple of distinct language groups. The Utes, and the Ute is short for Ute, and you can think of other tribe names like Comanche and you'll hear chi over and over and over when you start paying attention. Even think like in Mexico today, we have the state of Chihuahua, and the Mexica said that they they came from Chichimeca, which was the northern Rockies, and there's a Anyway, going to Chinese, when Chinese immigrants came over to work on the railroads in the Americas, they could speak. They had mutually intelligible words with the speakers of Tiwa and Kiowa.
That is fascinating. So you're saying people that are coming over here, immigrants from China, and I think, the way that I picture some of what was happening in, ancient America in the Wild West or whatever, that the Chinese were helping to build the railroads. It's you're saying that they could actually converse with Native Americans because they had similar linguistic word structures.
I think converse might be putting it a little bit strongly, but they have
Maybe in the same way that Italians and French have some shared words. Is that it? Like they could say, well, this is this, and they would say, oh yeah, that's very similar to the word that I know.
Yes, I don't, and I'm not sure. There's actually, I could look up the, I'm not sure what words, but I would imagine it was a lot of like home and familial words, because those are some that have the greatest roots. Even, the language English that we speak today comes from Germanic language, and the Germanic language is Indo-European. So a lot of our Germanic words are mutually intelligible with Sanskrit, and so words like mother and father and cow have not changed that much over time. Vowels change a lot, and consonants change a little bit, but we have this belief that the world was so divided up and unintelligible, but people used to move around a fair amount in languages.
I'm not sure how much there is, to give to the Polyglot conference, but they're, for just doing a little bit of sleuthing around on the internet, says that this connection exists between the Navajo and Chinese, and I think some of this is theorized to be because of the land bridge that existed. So there was actually, foot migration between the two continents at one point.
Well, so
about 10,000, 12,000 years ago.
Yeah, the Tiwa language is the Tiwa and Nawa, the Utes, the Uchi spoke Nawa, the sounds that are pleasing to the ear. But Navajo speak Athabascan, and the Athabascan was a movement of people that is much, much more recent, just a couple of thousand years ago, as opposed to 14 to 20 to possibly older than that of the Tiwa language. So it existed and was preserved for a very long time. So, and I'm not surprised at all with the associations of Athabascans. The Navajo, by the way, call themselves the Diné, and the Spanish called them the Apaches du Navajo. But Navajo means a person who farms a field, and yeah.
Dan, what were you saying about the land bridge? You're giving us a time frame, 12,000 years ago?
Well, that's I think what's associated with the land bridge theory of people migrating from Asia to North America, and North America being relatively unpopulated until that event. But I think there's a bunch of stuff that's left out there too that coincides with the younger Dryas archaeological.
Oh, we might be losing Dan a little bit, but I'll throw that younger Dryas on the screen.
There's some extinction events,
Have
disasters, things that happen.
Dan, are you familiar at all with the notion of
this kind of ties into?
You're breaking up a little bit, Dan. Dan, are you familiar with the postulation? Now we've lost him. Come back.
Now I'll try and get him back. We'll see if we can get him.
Well, so some people talk about a land bridge and coming over from Alaska over what we now call the Bering Strait. You also have to think about the stonework of the Inca and the tracking of the Native American religion, or the religion that we were talking about earlier, and I might say like the jaguar god, the fang deity, and where that comes from, and some of the oldest traces of it we find in Chile, not in Alaska, and I was describing both the Valley of Mexico, also the sun god, Sun Mountain is Pikes Peak, or the Utes would call it Tabauche. But we could think of it as Chibalenque, and of Machu Picchu. Very, very often these concepts of who the gods were are embodied in great geological features, and they called those huacas.
Are we talking about the what's it call it, the big pyramid style structures that have been built all over? This is
I think the pyramids, yes, is also an emulation of this understanding of huaca, but I bring up huaca because and we often see that in Spanish, or I'd say in North and South America as HUACA or WUCA, but think of Teotihuacan. Also, notice that the language of the peoples the old language is Tiwa or Tanoan, Teotihuacan. So it's all still carried there in the language, but think about Easter Island and the possibility of a Polynesian migration to Chile. Very, very possible too. And I point that out because if you think of some of the stone masonry of the Inca, and then think about the Wakas, the WAKKA of the Polynesian island on Easter Island. You have to wonder about how people came over. Also we don't have records of it, but the conquistadors talk about the amazing boats of the Inca, and they actually grew their trees to make their boats. So they would bend and shape the trees as the trees were growing so that they would form their massive boats. And we don't have any pictures or left. We burned all the quipu and the records of the Maya. I say we, Pizarro did. So
wow. I thought I knew something about some of these topics, but I basically, most of this is new to me.
Oh, I'm obsessed. So you brought up pyramids, and I think pyramids are also so fascinating because, of course, we see massive pyramids.
What's that name? Like the general name for that? Like there's it's not megalith. It's something else, right? I've got to imagine.
I mean, megalith means big stone. You mean megalithic structures?
Well, yes, but I thought that there was a general name for like when you build a pyramidic type structure that has these steps, because this is the kind of thing that's built all over the planet.
Like a ziggurat.
Ziggurat, that's the word.
Yeah, but
wait a second. Ziggurat means people who are throwing themselves under a giant work.
Wait, what? Really?
Yeah, look up ziggurat. Ziggurat was this notion of people throwing themselves in. I don't know. Maybe that's a false conclusion.
Well, this goes back to childhood or whatever when I was learning about this stuff. But I mean, I thought, oh look, there's pyramids, but they have steps, and oh, that's not a pyramid, that's a ziggurat. But who knows? That could just be big archaeology with their conspiracies. And I have no idea what ziggurat means. It doesn't sound like an Egyptian word.
Ziggurat, is, but I think it has a notion to do with some sort of notion of slaves who were building.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not getting what you said anywhere in here, but that ziggurat is definitely the general word for this. See, is all these people were building these kinds of step structure things, and it's my understanding that the pyramids were actually like this too, but they put stones on here to complete it. But Dan, does that comport? Is that what the pyramids were? Were they a ziggurat, or was it like a different structure?
My understanding is, I don't even know what they're supposed to be now, but they are built with such precision, and they're so huge. I mean, they actually have 8 sides. The pyramids of Giza are 8-sided, but you can only see this from above. When the shadow hits it a certain way, they are aligned within like a tiny, tiny decimal displacement off of less than 1 degree, way less than 1 degree of true north. And the way they're aligned indicates, and the position of the Sphinx, it honors precession and this changing of which stars they're pointed at. It kind of tells you when they're built too. They're much older than we are taught.
Well, but I'll cede ziggurats, but I do believe the Mesopotamian, not Mesopotamian, that the American pyramids are much older than the Mesopotamian pyramids.
What I've been looking into lately is that these things might have actually been power generators. It's kind of fringe, but there's some really interesting stuff out there if you're into it.
Well, so we can go far off the rails here. I do think that we have. I do think that that we have succumbed to a narrative in physics and a narrative about the world that needs to embrace some new ideas. And I'm not a physicist, but we have these notions of traveling to Mars. Elon Musk, like, it seems to be some sort of notion that we're going to embark on celestial discoveries. But I sometimes wonder if there aren't better ways, and if there aren't different ways to think about and understand the world. And even when it comes to antiquity, we talk a lot on the show about money, and I'm constantly amazed that we have these notions about debt and about how money is structured, and we never bother to stop and think about how people work together, how they get along, and what is possible whenever we go back and fiddle with some of these notions behind money. So very well possible.
Well, you look at some of these ancient cultures, and you look at the pharaohs, for instance. We're looking at the pyramids right now. Look at the pharaohs and their headdresses and what they symbolize. They've got this hooked cane and another thing, and then they had this headdress. What's going on there? And you look at some of these Peruvian mummies that have the elongated skulls. You have this common story in almost every culture, something like 180 cultures or more, that have a story of a flood sometime in their beginning or near, way back in antiquity. Some of the oldest cultures even have stories about the coming of the moon. There's a lot of stuff that is just glossed over, set aside. There was an Egyptian, presumably some sort of colony or installation in the Grand Canyon. This was in the newspaper about 120 years ago, 130 years ago. It was in the newspaper. The Smithsonian came out. They had pictures of things. All this stuff was boxed up, sent back to the Smithsonian, and then nary a word was said about it ever again.
Okay, wait. What did the Smithsonian claim was in the Grand Canyon?
Some explorers found in the Grand Canyon. They found a cave. They went inside, and it was very well appointed inside. It had been developed. There were mummies. There were Egyptian hieroglyphs. There was gold, art. Grant, see if you can find any of that. I guess I can look for it too. This is one of many things that it kind of ties into the whole Nephilim, giants, that sort of thing.
It's right here on the Smithsonian site.
Is it?
Yeah.
Grand Canyon and ancient Egypt. Oh, so now they're talking about it. When was this discovered? See if I was right with the timeline.
I don't know. I probably have to watch this video.
Okay.
It was uploaded in 2015, so not that long ago.
Yeah, this was like in the 1890s, maybe, or early 1910s, 1906, something like that. I'd say probably within 15 years of 1900, people in wooden boats were going down the Colorado River. They saw a cave, they pulled off to the side, they hiked up to it, and they found, what they might find in Egypt. And it was quite a discovery. And then it was in the newspaper, and then it just kind of got covered up, never talked about again for like about 100 years.
Well, there's been a, there has been a reticence of the quote unquote scientific community, and I always like to say science is a method. What's the philosophy behind it? And often the philosophy behind science is to prove that you're right, or an affirmation. So even whenever George McJunkin found the first Folsom Point and said, this was 30 feet down on an embankment in an ancient bison. The scientific community of the United States and those of the Ivy League institutions did not want to buy it. And they said, well, but the Bible says the world's only 6,000 years old. So I think we have been very reticent to accept some of these notions about the antiquity of the world and the correctness of our financial institutions too. But
these guys are saying no, Dan. So I'm not saying they're right, but like when I was trying to find it, it dates back to an article published in 1909, and the Smithsonian denies it apparently. But that's not. Yeah, that's not saying that that's not true, but they definitely are denying it. Yeah. Have either of you guys ever gotten exposed to this book? This was one of the first books I ever read that clued me into this kind of stuff. This is a really wild book that I think has been largely debunked, but this was the first time I got exposed to these ideas, was reading a paperback, Chariots of the Gods.
This is go ahead.
Well, I've not read it, but I do.
Don't bother. It's not worth your time. I'm not recommending it.
Well, there are references to like the Incan what are they called, those large artworks that only appear when you're above them.
The
Nazca lines, yes.
Yeah. Well, Nazca lines are sort of interesting, but I don't know. So I guess like in some way it's like, what's the timeline of this supposed astrological were we put here by aliens or not? I do find it fascinating to dig into, or to begin to understand how much ancient cultures did understand about astrology, about our position amongst the stars. And Grant, you've used the phrase before, it's turtles all the way down. Do you know where that phrase comes from?
Well, I think that's what is it? That's a Hindu thing, right? I'm pretty sure that this is the idea that the creation of the world is sitting atop a turtle. And if you ask, well, what is the turtle sitting on top of? It's like, well, it's another turtle. It's just turtles all the way down.
Sounds like, doesn't that sound like infinity? The turtle is the Crab Nebula. And going back to Asian coincidences or the things that they share in an interpretation of the world around us. I mentioned Aztec and how the Mexica people didn't call themselves the Aztec. When conquistadors asked them where they came from, they said Aztlan, and we now understand Aztlan to be the sky. And have you've heard of the three sisters in the Pilgrims learned the ways of the Powhatans, and they were taught that the three sisters were corn, beans, and squash. You remember that?
Yeah, I definitely have. This is the Pilgrim mythology that we're taught of the American mythology. Probably because I read Neil Gaiman's American Gods. I really like that book series. They just thoroughly go into a lot of that kind of stuff of the mythology that we're taught of ancient America.
Well, so and they probably are. Those are the three sisters. But going back to think of the what we talked about with Machu Picchu and Huacas and how gods are embodied in the world around us. And if you look up into the sky and you look to what we call the constellation Orion, the three stars that make the belt of Orion are the three sisters.
Ah.
And
Well, and by the way, I looked up the turtles thing, so yep, I remembered correctly. It's from Hindu mythology.
well, in Maya hieroglyphics, we see. I mean, what the zero and we've talked a little bit in mathematical and you know, I think I told you I don't believe in zero, and I don't believe in infinity.
Wait a minute, what? You don't believe in zero? What is that supposed to mean?
Yeah, I don't believe in zero, or I think it calls into question our concept of space time, our metaphor that we're using mathematics to explain the world around us.
Oh, actually, I think I recall this time when we had this conversation, and I don't know that we actually got into it on any show, but I remember us talking about math and like how quickly in math you arrive at the concept of a zero, just from something like set theory, and you say if you have a set that has no members, that's an obvious zero right there because the empty set is indicative of there's nothing in this set. It is zero. It is a size zero.
Well, and we also have these notions of political order, like that we've all so adopted that go back to Mesopotamia, these monotheistic religions, or in the Great Schism of the Christian Church, we have either the Orthodox monotheistic God, or we have the triune notion of God from 1 to 3. And think about those with in terms of conflict resolution. But what is zero? If there can be nothing, that must mean there's no God. But the Mayans had a very different understanding of how the world worked, and they said the world spins, the world is round, the universe is round, and zero and infinity are the same thing. And if we're going in a circle, there is at a point that we re-begin the circle, and that is where zero comes from. So when you look at Mayan hieroglyphs, the hieroglyph for zero is a tortoise shell, which has everything.
This is the kind of thing that I just have such a hard time with as a mathematician, because it seems to me that you arrive at zero pretty quickly, right? Let's say I go to market with my sheep, right? Let's say I have 5 sheep to sell. And people come by, and one by one, they buy a sheep. What happens when I have sold the last sheep that I had brought to market? How many sheep do I have for sale? I don't know, man. It just seems like you get there super fast. This idea that like ancient peoples wouldn't have a concept of zero, it just seems so foreign to me. I don't know how it could be the case that there wouldn't be a concept of zero, because you just get to it like really quickly anytime you think about a set or like what you have left.
How do you express zero in Roman numerals?
Who knows how you express anything in Roman numerals?
Well, I've been reading Tom Sawyer to my kids, and so we're on chapter XI right now, and they're starting to get it, but nobody's thought of zero yet. I posted a link to the Sumerian king list, and if you click on that and then go down to the contents, the list of kings and their initial reigns are quite interesting. They go into some disclaimers about how some of these are pre-dynastic and not verified by historical archaeological excavations, but Aluim had a reign of 28,800 years, and he was succeeded by Alingar, who ruled for 36,000 years. And this line goes on and on. This ties in with the Anunnaki stuff, because basically the first kings were aliens. They were Anunnaki. They came from another planet. They brought us civilization.
And this is linked to the Bible, where now it said, and the number of years of man should be 100 years, and he shall not live forever like Methuselah.
Well, maybe, I don't know. I mean, there's definitely some interesting stuff in there. It says 120 years, I think, is the max lifespan. But then in Psalms, it says 70, so that's 70. It just seems like a bad trend. But the Anunnaki theory explains a lot of stuff, and it's just a fascinating world to get into. Why did they come here? They came here to mine gold. They brought, a conquered race with them to mine the gold. They were kind of lizard-like in their appearance. Eventually, there's a rebellion. They found these early hominids and spliced their DNA into them and created Adamu. And, the first man was born. They also had other experiments that resulted in giants and monsters, cyclops, things like that. And then the flood that came, wiped everything out. And that was the last time I think there was a massive flood that most cultures remember was during the Younger Dryas, about 12,000 years ago. And I don't know. I think that's a key to understanding a lot of this stuff.
It's referenced in the Bible as well, right here in Genesis 6:4, right? Giants in the earth in those days.
Well, it's the Mayan creation myth also talks about the four worlds that were created and how monkey people were wooden people and giants were created. But I want to go back to zero. And Dan, is there a Roman numeral for zero?
That's a great question. I just thought of it. I have no idea, but I'll look into it.
Well, and Grant, I think you brought up sheep and I think it's very interesting that I mean, yes, we have something called accounting, telling a story. But in doing so, and for that creation of zero, you have to exclude, because the sheep are not gone. The sheep went into somebody else's narrative, and
well, yes, but again, it's in the context of how many sheep do I have left for sale, right? I mean, this is like the null set. This is why it must just be like my modern coloring and like being grounded in the way mathematics thinks about things, right?
If you have 26 sheep and one dies, how many do you have left?
Well, but also
there's no zero in Roman numerals. There's no zero.
Oh, interesting. And nobody can read them anyway, or I certainly can't. But we also have two systems of counting to this day. I mean, we have Newtonian physics and we have quantum physics, and the gods of science, physicists, seem unable to find some narrative that tells a story about the world in which they converge. So, when people talk about space exploration or progress or what the pyramids meant or what was different in antiquity, I wonder sometimes too if there isn't a different metaphor for what the world actually looks at, and to go back to what we started talking about.
I'm not sure we have enough knowledge on this show at this point to really talk about this, because I'm just like in our favorite spot, Wikipedia, whatever, that zero, it was not written, but that they had the word nulla, which was used to represent zero. So I'm not sure about this, guys. Like, I think that this comes up much more quickly than anybody could anticipate. I want to do a little bit more research on this. I'm going to have to, because it just seems such a strange concept to me that we would say ancient people would think that this was somehow the denial of God, right? Because again, it's about perspective. It's not saying, well, the sheep were gone, but like, I certainly don't have any left. And there's a lot of accounting that happens, like even in Mesopotamia, right? Like the ancient cuneiform tablets, a lot of them are just like, bitching about various very mundane things, or like saying, Joshua was late to work today because his wife was sick with the menstruation and stuff like that. And or it's like exhaustive lists of, just like accounting things. So these clay tablets that a lot of times that people find,
Bad Yelp reviews. Some guy got a bunch of copper from a vendor in Acadia or whatever, and they were not as good a quality as the last ones, and he wrote about it with his little stylus and cuneiform, and those tablets exist to this day.
Yeah,
He's got multiple
because they were
records.
mud and they got baked, and then they fell into the dirt and they were preserved, and so
and
these things
the
are.
tax records, those are there too. And the story of Gilgamesh, I mean, there are several copies of that exist, and that is an interesting story. Um, the scribe that was brought by the heavenly messengers, by the Anunnaki to their king, who told them how it all went down. And Gilgamesh went to find them again. And you guys know anything about Göbekli Tep Göbekli Tepe? I can't say it. It's in Turkey. It's a prehistoric site, a bunch of megaliths. It's a World Heritage Site now.
Yep.
Way older than anything in Egypt.
Well, they're finding more of them too. But when we talk about okay, let's move away from math and just think about the alphabet, a set of 26 or God knows how many other sounds, a little bit different than math, but we have a distinction between fiction and nonfiction. It's why in mathematics must the rules for astronomy be the same for the things that are happening between people, the sheep that are being traded. I mean, to me, some people might have seen it very differently, rather than expecting that all to line up and think that we could count everything.
The Dogon in Africa, they had knowledge of stars and planets around those stars that they shouldn't have known. You couldn't see with the naked eye. There are people in antiquity that knew things that they shouldn't have been able to know. Where did they get this knowledge? I mean, I brought up the Anunnaki a couple of times, but I'm not really getting any nibbles here. If you look at the line of kings, why would they write that these kings reigned for tens of thousands of years? If you look at the art too, they're much bigger, the original kings.
Well, I mean, that's just we're already 40 minutes over, so I don't know that I want to pick up and run with that. But Grant, we also I love to throw out some sci-fi every now and then, and when Dan, as you talk about the Anunnaki and some of these notions, and I was talking about Mars exploration, like everyone needs to read the Mars trilogy by Kim Stanley Robinson, because he basically picks up with some of this narrative about how we might have arrived here at Earth, and then projects that on to our exploration of Mars, and it's a fascinating trilogy that delves into questions about how we got to Earth to begin with. So, anything to close it up? I think we.
I don't know. This was a fascinating tour through a lot of pretty wild ideas. I don't
Random
think we
half thoughts and such. I just had a couple thoughts. One, I would definitely be more interested in modern sports ball if either the losing team or the winning team had to vote somebody off the island and they were put to death on TV. That would be very interesting. And I don't really. I think maybe that's a tie back to older sports. Maybe not. The other thing is Mars. Elon Musk wants to go to Mars. Why? Another extinction event. It's just a matter of time. An asteroid, something. And then we get a reset. There have been some people speculate as many as 5 or 6 high civilizations before ours that have been almost completely wiped off the map. But I'd love to talk about this with you guys again some other time.
I think, and going back to also that earlier discussion, I think that that the next time when we delve into the topic, let's talk about sacrifice, because even why do some people want to go to Mars? It's because we talked about how closely we came to a nuclear war and how close that we are to a nuclear war, at all times, and we've grown accustomed to that. But maybe part of that understanding is an understanding of human nature and inevitability, and maybe that's why the conversation about sacrifice is so very important in religions, and we've gotten very much away from a discussion about sacrifice in our religions today. It's always about, like, this narrative about evil is one that assumes that the person who's declaring evil is divine themselves, and I think that's maybe part of the cycle that we endure and all of those civilizations.
Great topic, guys. We'll see you next week.